Hi everybody. So this is an overview of Chapter 3 in EDU 250, and this chapter is called Teaching Your Diverse Students. So I've done some front-loading for this already. Front-loading is a term, if you don't know it, of building capacity for understanding a concept. And so past week I asked you in discussion forums to look at bias videos, and then also to do a diversity inventory of yourself and to share that with your peers and groups. And so for me, that was sort of building the scene for you reading this chapter and thinking about what diversity might mean in the classroom. And this chapter also builds on Chapter 2 as well, so they kind of really work together. I just want to go over a couple of things. I'm not going to go over everything, but I do want to point out a few things. So some of the theories that go into this idea of diversity. There's the deficit theory, okay, that because of cultural or social or linguistic background, students can't do something, okay. And then there's the expectation theory that we perceive that students can't do something because of their particular cultural or racial or socioeconomic group, and so we don't ask much of them, okay, and so the expectations are low. And really what we need to do is understand this cultural difference, and understand and mediate a cultural gap. If there is a gap, and oftentimes there is we have to find ways to mediate that. So those are some of the theories that, that we need to think about when we think about diversity in the classroom, making sure that we are addressing the diversity, and we're also making sure that all students are learning. For many years, we called it the melting pot, where everybody came together and, it was sort of this crucible, and we all went into it, and we came out all looking the same and talking the same and smelling the same and acting the same. And we know that's not true. It's not even true in a WASP community, or the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I mean, that we're all different, even within our individual cultures and our individual, familial groups or communities. So this idea of assimilation, of we're all assimilated into something, and then there's this idea of enculturation. I have a hard time with that word for something, for some reason, where we, the same thing, kind of like the same thing as assimilation, where we're transformed into something new. Instead of looking at cultural pluralism and looking at the fact that we are many people, in a country. Who have the same goals and expectations for being a citizen, but may have different ways of being in this particular world. So, cultural pluralism is a recognition that some groups, I'm reading this from the text, voluntarily or involuntarily have maintained their culture and their language. We don't see too many, we see pockets of that, but the farther away we get from the actual parent culture, those who actually embrace that culture in the original form, the farther we get away from that, the more enculturation and assimilation happens. I give myself for example. My grandfather immigrated from Finland in the 1930s, and he maintained some of his Finnish cultural traditions. My mother, his only child, did not. I'm kind of a throwback. I'm the third generation. I like some of those cultural Finnish traditions and try to maintain them, but very difficult at this point. But I don't speak the language. I don't, I know some of I like some of the foods still, and I like some of the traditions, but it's very watered down. Okay, so that's one example, and I'm sure you can come up with other examples as well. One moment, let me get my paper going here. And then there's a section on bilingual education I'd like you to look very carefully at. Historically, it's been language submersion, where it's sink or swim. A student gets or they don't. And again, I'm going to give my grandfather as an example. When he came to this country, he couldn't speak English at all. He could speak Russian and German and Finnish and Swedish, but he couldn't speak English. And he was, he was an adult, so he didn't go to school here. But nonetheless, he was submerged into a linguistic culture and had to sink or swim. And he ended up swimming pretty nicely. He conquered the language and spoke it very eloquently, almost flawlessly without an accent. But many people don't. And there were many people in his generation who immigrated to this country from Finland who did not. They kept their language. They were very, very closed in their own little communities and only spoke their language among themselves. The only English they learned is what they needed to do to be able to function, in the outside world, in stores and banks and so forth and so on. So we have these various ways of, we think of bilingual education. So today we have a lot of ELL learners, English language learners in our schools, and in Maine we do as well, even though Maine still has a long ways to go with diversity in terms of, moving past a very white state. We have come a long ways, especially in the cities, Lewiston, Portland, and so forth. We do have much more diverse culture, and so there's transitional instruction, which is a bridge to English. We have a maintenance, where students learn in both languages. Dual language, which adapts that maintenance piece and develops the language skills of both the ELL learners and the English speakers, so they learn each other's language in the classroom. And then there's immersion, which is exclusively English. And generally a sheltered English is used, which is a more simplified version. So these are approaches you should know about. You may or may not teach in a school where you have ELLs, but it's important for you to understand some of these theories and also to understand the controversy, because there's a lot of controversy here, and there's an English-only movement that's been going on for a long time, and some states have actually, enacted official English rule, and on page 73 you can see those states that have. Maine does not, has no final action on that. But take a look at it. Knowing this book is a couple years old, and there may be have been some changes in there, but it'll give you a good flavor, anyway, of what that is. And just anecdotally, I was coming to work the other day, and I was behind a car, and there was one of those stickers on the window, and it showed a flag, and the words beside it said, "Why the hell should I have to press 1 for English?" And I was a little disturbed by that. I'm like, well, because we're, a pluralistic society, and, not everybody does speak English, and should they? I don't know. I don't have the answer. I mean, I'm okay with having multiple languages in a country, and I'm okay that, that our official language is, our official business is conducted in English, and it's okay, and I was a little offended by that, and, it was American flag and all of that, and so we have this sort of nationalistic, not all of us, I'm just speaking broadly, but generally have this nationalistic tendency to want to, make everybody like us, and that's some problems with that, especially when we look at our young people. I always told my students that there were many discourses in the world and many ways of being in the world, and I didn't want any of them to give up their ways of being in the world, but I wanted them to understand other people's ways of being in the world as well. So I'd like to have you take a look at that. And then the multicultural piece, too, very important for me, and I hope for you as well. So multicultural education is in various places in the world and in various schools and districts. And the Banks version is the one that I kind of like to look at. James Banks came up with a sense of approaches to multicultural education, and there's sort of the tokenism, the contributions, where we only look at the contributions of the so-called heroes and what they've given to history, particularly American history. And then there's, without changing the curriculum, it's still that sort of very colonial education of looking at a very sort of white-based population, and its histories and so forth and so on, contributions. Though that adding in the contributions of other people, for instance, like Sacagawea, Rosa Parks, Booker T. Washington, and so forth. So we learn about the contributions of other people to our society. And then there's the additive approach, where we have these sort of specials, like it's African American Week, it's whatever week or month or so forth and so on, Women's History Month, and so we sort of punctuate learning about other cultures and other people, but we still don't change the structure. Then there's transformative, and this is where the curriculum is changed to be all-encompassing. And so I don't know if you're familiar with the Howard Zinn Project on history. If you're not, you should really take a look at it. Also, Rethinking Schools, which is another institution or organization that really is looking for culturally responsive instruction, where groups are not excluded or seen on the periphery, but we look at the history of a pluralistic society. So the nature, the Eurocentric nature of the curriculum has changed, and so we view things from diverse ethnic and cultural perspectives. Okay. okay? And the example they give in your book is the westward expansion of Europeans can be seen as manifest destiny through the eyes of European destinations, or an invasion from the east from the eyes of Native Americans. So it's the perspectives, providing different perspectives about our culture and our history. Then there's the fourth one, which is social justice, social action, and this goes beyond the transformative approach, so that students not only have these various viewpoints, but they're involved in problem solving. How do we solve these problems? Okay, at this I'm reading again. At this level, the school would address social and economic needs here and abroad, advocate human rights and peace, and work to ensure that the building and activity do not harm the environment. So it's not passive; it's very active, political activism. There's a lot of states that have pushed back against this. Arizona is one. Arizona has banned. They had a Chicano curriculum. They banned a bunch of books that they felt was subversive to the American way. So look it up. It's there, and they've put a different curriculum in that. And none of the books are by Latin American authors. So. Who knows? So anyway, just take a look at the multiculturalism and then look at culturally responsive teaching as well. There's some really nice bolded sections here that help you to think about students developing critical consciousness. And culturally responsive teaching, it builds self-esteem, the home culture is honored, and it challenges social injustices. And we want a population of students who advocate for their fellow human beings. Peggy McIntosh in 1986 wrote an article called The Invisible Knapsack, and I put that in the discussion forum for you to read. It's voluntary. Please understand, this is optional whether you want to respond to that or not. You already have 2 discussion forums this week, and so this would be a third one. But if it speaks to you and you're inspired by it, please write something about it. But I would like you to read it at some point. If you don't get to it this week, then read it some other time. And look and see what she says about that. There's in your text on page something that I don't have it in front of me. Anyway, she's referenced as having written this, and it's pretty powerful. It's a little dated, but it's still pretty powerful. So take a look at it, and then the book gives you some things about generalizations and stereotypes. I'd like you to look carefully at that, and they give you some case studies. Okay, they give you some actual students and give you a summary of who they are and their cultural background and so forth and so on. And then they ask you to try to come up with a generalization. Okay, so generalizations are they don't stereotype people, but they sort of look at a general population. So, for instance, let me see if I can find the one here that the example. Sorry, I'm losing my track here. Well, I had it marked, but now I can't find it. Oh, well, so instead of saying they never make eye contact, referring to a certain cultural group, that's a stereotype. But a generalization might be some members of this particular group may not make eye contact, particularly because of X, Y, Z. So it's a generalization. It doesn't paint everybody with the same brush. But generally speaking, this is a cultural norm in this particular group or population. So take your hand at it and see what you think. There's 7 students here. It's not required, but I think it's a nice exercise for you to think about how this might look for you. I think that's it. Okay, there's an acronym at the end called DIVERSE, and it gives you some guidelines for thinking about curricula for culturally responsive teaching. And take a look at that. It's diverse instructional methods, inclusive, variety, exploration, reaction, safety, and evaluation. And it's good stuff. I mean, I think it's really important for us to pay attention to that. One thing they do say in here that I've said, and I've read others have said, that curriculum should be a combination of windows and mirrors. Some of it should reflect back our own cultural understanding, but some of it should open up a window into other worlds as well. So that's it, Chapter 3. Enjoy your reading. And remember, this is the end of Part 1, and then we're going to be moving into your RATs. You're going to do that for, not this week, but the following week. And then we're going to move into Part 2, which is schools and curriculum. So I appreciate your attention, and have a great weekend.